afterwards. If you want to grab some, please do. This is for the 22nd of December, where we have, it's called Christmas at Southeast. And it's kind of our typical Christmas program with some changes. This year we're having a meal beforehand. We're going to have soups and sandwiches and a Christmas cookie competition. And it's something that we can come together as a body. Absolutely. We want everyone who's here and who's not here today to be a part of that, but we want you guys to invite your family and friends as well. The Christmas cookie competition is going to be pretty simple. Basically, if you want to join in on it, make 2 dozen cookies. That's a pretty standard amount for most recipes. One of them is going to be your show cookie. Make sure that one's really pretty. You get to choose which one it is. That one's going to be voted on, the best decorated. A dozen or so cookies is just going to go on the table with the other desserts for dessert. But then the remaining 11 or so, what you're going to do is you're just going to cut them up into pieces so that everyone can have a taste of your cookie. So that there will be 2 prizes, one for best decorated and one for best tasting. You might win both, but you have to try both. But we want to make it something fun that we can do together as a family, but also just have a little bit of fun. There's going to be some crafts there as well for the kids. And then afterwards, we're going to come up here and we're going to sing songs and we're going to watch some little clips of just the story of the birth of Jesus as we come together as a body to celebrate the birth of our Messiah, the end of the wait. And we want you to invite your family and friends along too, because that's what we want to be. We want to be a body that's not just having events. We don't want to just have events to try to get names and numbers. We're having events because it's what we do. We celebrate the birth of our Messiah, and we want to invite other people along with it so that we can build those connections and share those relationships as we live out the gospel. So please, if you haven't already, grab something to hand out to somebody, to give to a neighbor, to invite them along for food, fun, and the feeling of family. We're starting this new series here, as one does for Christmas time at the beginning of December. I call it the Adventurous Journey. Thank you. The time of Advent, the word itself means, and this is not even on, so we're going to get to it. It means the arrival. It's this feeling of waiting for something to come, to finally arrive. Traditionally, throughout Christian history, this season of Advent was a time of counting down for the time of celebration of something that already arrived. There's something wonderful about that feeling of expectation of something coming, something exciting. As children, we experience this strained patience as we wait for the coming of Christmas morning, where we just can't wait to get out there and open those presents. We can't wait to pull down the stocking and see what's inside. Whether it's candy and stuff like that. When I was growing up, we always had like apples and oranges in our stockings. That was just one of the German traditions that kind of followed us into my family. Walnuts. I didn't like walnuts when I was growing up, but I always had like a handful of walnuts in there as well. I've told the story up here, I think, before. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, I got a new bike, and I may or may not have snuck out earlier in the morning and saw it. And so then I went back to bed, and I came out, and I was like, oh no, they're going to know that I saw it early. So I faked a faint out of excitement for seeing it whenever I went out there, because I was doing what I thought I needed to do to show that I was still excited. But as kids, we have this just spirit of excitement as we're waiting for this special day when we get to tear into those gifts, if you were good enough. Anxiously waiting in expectation for the arrival of joy of those that the gifts promised. As we get older, our piles get a little smaller, and our excitement for Christmas pivots a little bit. We're not usually so excited for our presents necessarily under the tree, but we find other ways that we can experience that expectation. Sometimes it's seeing the joy displayed in the eyes of our children, knowing that something that you got them is going to bring them just overwhelming joy. And there's just a good feeling in that. To know that in that moment, they feel a small measure of that fullness of love that you feel for them the whole time. That they can really feel it and see it because at that moment they're touching it. Other times we experience this feeling of expectation when we've got a vacation coming up. This time of year, there's a lot of vacations. Sometimes we go to visit family. Sometimes we go to avoid visiting family. But there's usually a feeling of expectation that you get to go somewhere new. You get to see people that you haven't seen in a long time, or maybe places and people that you've never seen before. Now, when it comes to these kinds of journeys, whether you're going to visit family or you're going to, again, avoid visiting family, there's usually two different ways that you plan this kind of trip, this journey. There's usually, well, two. There's three different kinds of people. There's the planner, those who want every single detail meticulously sketched out so that you know on every day, at every moment, what exactly you're doing. Then there's people who are kind of the opposite, who just want to go, and they will do what they need in the moment. The third type is someone in between. There's always three. There's extremes and then people in the middle. I'm kind of the person in the middle. I really don't like planning a lot. Most people who know me know this. I get too stressed out from planning things ahead of time. I would prefer to deal with it in the moment, but I do understand that there is a need sometimes for at least a structure. When we go to Japan, I love knowing roughly what we're doing, but I like having opportunities to improv a little bit. Sometimes you're just too tired and you don't want to travel anymore. You just want to rest for a day, and I think that that's okay. There are benefits to both sides, even though some would rather just play it by ear. But there's that feeling of joy-filled expectation of going on this journey. A wonderful to know that it's coming, but sometimes it's a horrible feeling because it's not here yet. We've officially, in my opinion, entered the season of hope and anticipation. Even though, again, we've talked about it many times before, a lot of stores start throwing up the Christmas stuff in October, which is ridiculous. As soon as Halloween was over, my kids wanted to put out Christmas decorations, and I was like, no, you got to respect the turkey. And so we put out Christmas decorations anyway. But officially, since Thanksgiving is over, now is the time that we can look towards this official Christmas season. It's a season that invites us to consider a journey. With expectant hearts, the journey of Mary and Joseph. We can look at the journey of the shepherds as they journey in their own way of not knowing what's going on to getting this great message to going out and sharing this message. And then we have this journey of the wise men who traveled a long way because of a sign in the stars. During this series, we're going to be thinking back to the very real lives of these men and women as they come face to face with the fulfillment of what they had been expecting for so long and how they came to terms with it and to understand how God made that impossible thing possible. So that's kind of a preview of the purpose of this series. Now, it's easy when reading the Bible to mistakenly come to the idea that the Messiah, that Jesus is coming, was divine improvisation. That it was a last-minute solution to a problem that humanity kept creating. That God looked at broken covenant after broken covenant, broken promise after broken promise, failures by kings, by priests, all the way down to the common man, that he would look at them and show them their error of their ways, that they would reap the fruit of their failures, that they would cry out to the Lord for rescue, and he would answer. And then finally he just said, you know what? I'm going to change my plan to make this work. It's not hard to misread that this was God's way of dealing with his plans failing in the face of human intervention. To borrow and adjust a very common idiom, God plans and man laughed. It's not hard to see why people might take the position that Jesus, this divine trump card, was a last-ditch effort to make God's way possible. It's wrong, but it's an understandable mistake. This perspective underestimates the profound nature of God's eternal plan. Because from the very beginning, it was God's plan to redeem the world through his Son. The Old Testament isn't just a patchwork of half-kept promises and almost successful ideas that God quilted together to make something that kind of worked. No. It's an intentionally intricate tapestry, woven with prophecies and promises, consistently pointing to not just the presence of a Messiah, but the need for a Messiah long before the people realized they needed a Messiah. While human history unfolded with its twists and turns, God's plan remained steadfast, guiding the course of events towards the ultimate fulfillment, that being God's plan for salvation, one that transcends human planning and improvisation, despite of and because of the free will that God gave us. Jesus was and always had to be the plan. So today we're starting with a cosmic journey, a journey that began long before the dawn of creation, one that ended with the arrival of Jesus as not a desperate act on God's part, but an intentional choice he made. Because God didn't just stand up with a huff and say, fine, I'll do it myself. It was always the plan to do it himself. The prophets, inspired by the Holy Spirit, foresaw the coming of the Messiah, again, long before the people of Israel realized they needed a Messiah. If you read through the books of Kings and Chronicles, you'll see that each of the kings basically thinks that they are living the fulfillment of the plan. But they were barely even in the middle. There was something better coming. The birth of Jesus wasn't a sudden pivot. It was the culmination of centuries of divine promises. It was a journey that required patience, faith, and unwavering trust in God's timing. So as we contemplate the events of this Advent season, I want us to be reminded that God's plan is perfect. Even when it doesn't, especially when it doesn't conform to our expectations. Because if there's one thing that God's good at, it's not conforming to our expectations. So today we're going to look at just a few of the promises because there's a lot of them. Too hard to even see on the picture above me. Hundreds of prophecies pointing to this Messiah. Promise from the start because it was required from the start. Because it didn't take humanity long to break what God built. The devil preyed upon the arrogance of man, tempting that which was created with this empty promise of equality with the Creator. The same failure that Satan made in his own life, believing that he could be equals with God, that God could be wrong and he was angry about it, and then led an uprising against him. The consequences of Adam and Eve's sin caused them to be driven out of the garden. Caused them to be driven out of the garden. It obligated them to a life of hardship, struggle, pain, and death, when beforehand they had everything that they needed. They needed nothing. They had access to a tree, the tree of life. And they forsook it for the sake of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil because they wanted so much just to be equals with God. And despite their failures, God did not forsake them. He clothed them to remove the shame of their nakedness. And he made a promise to vindicate them from the enemy that led them astray. That first promise. That first promise of hope. We find that in Genesis chapter 3:15, and it's not even necessarily a promise to Adam and Eve, but it's a strange promise to the devil. A promise that he will be defeated. A promise that there will be victory from the seed of the woman. Even though they're going to be punished for their arrogance. Even though they will continue to be tormented by the enemy. As he mentions that you will strike his heel. The serpent, the Satan, the accuser will be destroyed. The head will be crushed. The enemy would one day be defeated once and for all. It's not a question of if, but a question of when, from where, and how. Fast forward a few generations, more than a few generations. Humanity has been hard at work, being fruitful, multiplying, and subduing the earth. Many, if not all, though, losing sight of their Creator and subduing it for their own sake rather than in the name of the Lord. God's covenants have continued despite the adultery of the people. Their faithlessness manifesting in further failures and defeats at the hands of their enemies, and the nation of Israel split. Its holiness diluted by idolatry, as well as every other sin that Moses said don't do in the Ten Commandments. Chapter 7 of Isaiah, we find Ahaz, the king of Judah, and he's fearful. He's fearful because his cousins to the north, the nation of Israel, were threatening to attack them, joining with their enemies to bring conflict. And Isaiah tells them, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. God is with you. Isaiah tells them not to fear, but to stand firm in their faith. To trust in the Lord, because if they don't, then they're not going to stand at all. And that's why we find this very interesting situation where Isaiah states for a fact, he says, they will not attack. Ask for a sign. Ask for a sign. And Ahaz says, no. I don't want to test the Lord. I'm not going to test the Lord. I'm not going to ask for a sign. And Isaiah's like, I'm a prophet of God. I've offered it to you. What's wrong with you? And he says, here's the sign. To a virgin, a child will be born. She will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. And it goes on to talk about how while that child is eating curds and honey, even at that point, he'll know the difference between right and wrong. And before that, your enemies will already be defeated. That's the sign. It's a surprising prophecy. It's surprising because if this is talking about Jesus, well, then how could it be assigned to Ahaz? What's going on there? Well, there's this interesting thing that we can find in the prophecies within the Old Testament, and it's something that is known as dual fulfillment, in which the prophecy has a fulfillment early on, historically, but then there are echoes later of something bigger, something greater. This was supposed to be a prophecy so Ahaz could have confidence that God was with them, that God had not abandoned them. But nowhere will you find in the Kings or Chronicles or even in the part of Isaiah where it says, and it was fulfilled thusly. where a virgin gave birth. Now, when looking at it, most scholars believe that, at least historically, the original fulfillment of this was in the birth of Hezekiah, Ahaz's son. Was she born to a virgin? No, not necessarily. Because the word virgin there, it could be translated as young lady, maiden, of marrying age, basically. The assumption is likely a virgin. But it can have a couple meanings. And they believe that it was fulfilled, at least originally, in Hezekiah, because Hezekiah was a pretty good king. He was a faithful king. And proof that God was still with Judah. At the end of Hezekiah's life, he was dying and he's asking for just a little bit more time. And God gives him more time. And tells Hezekiah, Judah will not fall while you're alive. Because Hezekiah was proof that God was still with Judah. But what you won't find is anywhere where Hezekiah is ever called Emmanuel. Which is why in centuries that passed, the Jews were still looking back to this prophecy and knowing that there was something more, something deeper, something richer that they were still waiting for, that they still had a promise that was waiting for them. The dual fulfillment here demonstrates God's sovereignty over history and his ability to work in ways that we can't fully understand. God, through Isaiah, made a promise to come and take care of an issue, the issue of sin. That it wouldn't be a servant, it wouldn't be a champion, it wouldn't be a messenger, it would be God himself. So we know who to look for now. This Messiah is not just some other guy, some other leader. It was God himself. So how do we know when the Messiah comes? Well, we don't know necessarily when. The when was never fully spelled out. It's not like God gave a prophet with a calendar that they could pull off a page every day until they knew the Messiah was going to come. That would only happen once it happened. There was no timer, no divine cuckoo clock. But they knew where to look. The prophet Micah confronted the people of Judah, the same people, with simple truth about the upcoming exile. Yes, God is with you. Yes, you are safe for now. But Assyria is coming. That was the last part of that first prophecy in Isaiah 7. It says that the child will come, he'll be eating curds and honey, which is kind of a description of like prosperity. He will know right from wrong, and your enemies will defeat it. And at the very end, and it says, and the king of Assyria will come. Even when he comes, guess what? Even when Assyria comes, God's still in control. And Micah furthers this story. He keeps telling him, hey, exile is coming because it's deserved. But don't lose hope. Don't lose hope in the face of punishment, because there is a promise of restoration that comes with it. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrath, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth one more who is to be ruler in Israel, who's coming forth from old, from ancient days. This was the not-so-divine secret, a long, not-forgotten prophet of where the Messiah would be born. We know this to be true because when the wise men come in and they're looking for the king, they go first to Herod, and Herod asks his teachers and the priests and the teachers of the law and says, where are they going to come? Oh, that's easy. It's Bethlehem. Bethlehem. Yeah, Bethlehem. Now, if I guess I couldn't have lived through that many generations, but if I knew that there was a Messiah being born in Bethlehem, I would have a register of every child ever born in Bethlehem, and I would keep tabs on them. Just so that I could let everyone know once one starts to show signs that he is not just born in Bethlehem, but also Emmanuel. But they stopped looking, I guess. That's what happens over time with years of expectation. We kind of lose the fervor and lose our desire to keep watch. But the scribes knew. They knew from where. The where happened on that night in Bethlehem, where Mary and Joseph couldn't even find a room to stay. But that's a journey we're going to be talking about next week, so we're going to move on. So the Messiah is going to come through a child. That this child would be more than just a man. He would be God with us. But how? How is this Messiah going to make a difference? How will this Messiah rule? Now, much of the language used to describe the Messiah's rule is very militaristic. Talks about conquest. Even if you just read through the rest of Micah 5, you'll get a picture of conquest, restoration, and judgment. And though an agent of change, a Messiah, and that this Messiah would upend the status quo, God's plan for Jesus' ministry did not culminate with a military coup or political upheaval. It was different. Now, this isn't because God's plan was thwarted. Jesus didn't get cut off at the pass by the devil and his machinations. His rejection, his ultimate sacrifice was the plan. His kingdom was not of this world, as he said to Pontius Pilate himself. But it was one that was greater than the world. Isaiah 53. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds we are healed. This is just a tiny snippet of 53. If you haven't read it in a while, go and read it. Because this is the kind of promise of the Messiah that even his disciples who were anxiously waiting for a Messiah forgot about. Would often forget about because they were focused too much on this idea of conquest and restoration of Israel rather than looking at what the Messiah has actually come to do. We see Jesus like frustrated to no end with his apostles numerous times throughout his ministry. We see Jesus hard stopping his ministry for a moment to grab him by the shoulders and shake him a bit and say, the Son of Man will be rejected and killed. And in 3 days be resurrected. He's trying to get them to be prepared for what they're waiting for because they don't necessarily understand fully what they're waiting for. This servant, this Messiah will suffer and be sacrificed. Not because the devil won a battle, because that was the plan the whole time. Joel and I are reading a book right now called The Great Divorce. It's a C.S. Lewis book. It's fascinating. But in it, there's a scene where one of the characters is kind of like feigning some religiosity, for lack of a better real word. And in his conversation, he's like, man, just imagine what we could have learned if Jesus wasn't killed so early in his ministry. Just imagine what we missed out on because his ministry didn't reach maturity because he was cut off after only 3 years. which is a very human way to look at Jesus' ministry. Not realizing that that 3-year ministry reached its maturity. Its fullness was made complete on the cross, not cut short at the cross. Now, C.S. Lewis isn't saying that that's a positive thing. He's using it as a kind of ad hominem attack, actually, on certain people. Anyway. This was where it was always headed. Jesus was not a detour. His resurrection was not a last-minute trump card that God pulled out of his sleeve. It was always the plan. Through the interconnectedness of these prophecies over hundreds of others, we can see the sovereignty of God and the timeless nature of God's plan. This season is about a celebration of an arrival that occurred roughly 2,000 years ago. A long-awaited gift of a Messiah. That's why we exchange gifts. That's why we, as we talked about last Christmas, arbitrarily kind of chose December 25th to be the day of Jesus' birth, because we just wanted to find a day. A day where we can celebrate something given to us. The fulfillment of a promise. The end of our wait. We are taking time during this month and the day of Christmas to celebrate the end of that wait. Like children running out of our rooms on Christmas morning. The Messiah was born. He is Emmanuel, God with us. He brought us hope for salvation through his sacrifice. Not because God changed the rules to fix what we broke, but because that was the plan ever since we first broke the rules in the beginning. What we need to remember is that arrival was just part of the plan. What we need to remember is that we're not done waiting. We need to not fall into the same trap as the kings did during the height of the nation of Israel, where they thought that they were living out the fulfillment of the plan. We need to re-find that childlike wonder and joy, knowing that there's still something better waiting for us. We get to now excitedly wait in expectation for his triumphal return. Not fearful of the return, but excited for that return. We have a lot to celebrate this time of year. And we still have a job to do. To share that good news that not only was the Messiah born to a virgin in the town of Bethlehem, called forth out of Egypt, not only did he minister to the sick and the demon-possessed, not only did he make the blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk, and the dead live. Not only was he rejected by religious leaders, tortured and killed, not only was he resurrected on the third day, but he also ascended into heaven and has prepared a place for us because he's coming back to take us. And that's pretty exciting to wait for. Are we finding joy in that wait? Do we feel that horrible pain in that wait? I don't know. I think sometimes we got pretty comfortable where we're at, feeling like this was the plan. But it's not. The journey's not over. We have not yet fully arrived. But he's coming soon. And he's going to take us home. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for making this plan. Setting all of those things into motion that brought Jesus to fruition there in Bethlehem on that night. that guided him throughout his ministry, that informed his decisions and how he healed and helped and taught. I thank you for his sacrifice on the cross and his resurrection that to this day I can't fully understand. I thank you for your love, which I can't fully understand, that would go through all of this trouble to restore your creation to be reunited with you. I thank you for that journey. And I thank you for the end, which is coming soon. God, while we wait expectantly for that time, Lord, I just pray that you will give us a spirit that wishes to share this joy with those around us, to let them know that they have something to wait for as well, a gift offered to them that they don't deserve, but is freely offered anyway. Help us to share this joy. Help us to reflect your love and mercy. And help us to rekindle that childlike wonder and excitement for your promise, which is going to be fulfilled. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King, peace on earth.